So we are going to begin. I would like to introduce our first speaker. That is Julia Huys, who is a lawyer and works at the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada. She loves cycling in her spare time and is passionate about cycle tourism, which I think Toronto should do more of. So let's welcome Julia.
Everyone. Hi. Thank you. That's so kind. Okay, so my story is about my first cycle tour with my father, Martin. I was 19 years old, and we cycled from our home in London, Ontario, to St. John's, Newfoundland. So this is a map approximately of our route. The trip took 33 days and totaled about 3,400 kilometers. We later completed the Lake Superior Circle Tour together. That was in 2011. It was about 1,700 kilometers. And in 2014, we did the Lake Michigan Tour, which was, I think, about 1,400 or 1,500 kilometers. And for my father, this was a big milestone because this was his last Circle Tour. So he had toured around all 5 of the Great Lakes, and the last 2 with me. But for the purposes of this evening, I'm really going to talk to you about the Newfoundland trip because, well, it was the longest, but for me, being 19 years old and my first tour, it was really the one where I experienced the most personal growth and where I really learned about cycling and the beauty of cycle tourism.
They love you. They love you out there, Julia.
Happy motorist.
Very passionate. Okay, so I'll tell you first. Yeah, that's it.
Really?
It's pretty good though. Someone parks in the bike lane and the bus is leaning on the horn because they can't get past, right? Pretty good. You won't count this against your time.
Okay, this is eating into my time. Okay, so I'll first tell you a little bit about my dad and then how I ended up doing cycle tourism. So my father always loved adventure and loved cycling. He was never too intense about it. On his tours, he'd often just take an old bike that he fixed up and some camping gear, and off he would go. When this fall, I turned 18, when I went off to university, he completed the first leg of the country tour. So he went from Victoria, BC to London, Ontario. And so the following summer, I hinted to him that I might be interested in doing the rest of the country with him. And I think he was just so happy to have one of his children interested in this hobby that he loved. So we started to plan our trip. So we set off at the end of July 2004. And let me say, after a year on my own, out of university, I thought myself a proper adult. I felt I knew everything. But I realize now I did more maturing on this trip, and I learned more that carried me throughout life than I did in my first years leaving the house. So firstly, I learned to slow down and appreciate simpler things. I was 19 years old when we did this trip, and at first I was focused on the finish line. I wanted the finish, I wanted the glory, I really wanted the bragging rights, I wanted to feel physically fit. I thought that was what this trip was all about. I also thought that since I was an adult now and out of the house, it was time to hear some of my dad's old adventure stories from his 20s. And I thought we would have these heart-to-heart conversations in this stereotypical way, and he would tell me all about his wilder days. So I have to say I was a bit confused when my dad only wanted to talk about the route. He wanted to talk about the towns and the cities we stopped in, how many kilometers we would ride in a day, how many flat tires we got, which was a remarkable average of 4 a day on that trip. Campsites, roadside motels, and the max speeds on our speedometers going down the hill. He didn't seem at all excited about our final trip, St. John. Already? That ate into my time.
I buzzed, yeah.
At first, this puzzled me, but as time went on, I noticed my thinking changed and became all about the journey. So let me share a little bit about that journey with you. First off, there is a beauty to life on the road. So this is a picture of the ferry arriving into Porto Basque. And what I've written out here is from my journal that I wrote in 2004. So I took my old journal getting ready for this presentation. So it's from August 4th, 2004, and I'm not going to read it out for you, but it was day 24 of our trip. And that night we stayed in the Wishing Well campsite in Newfoundland, and we cycled 100 kilometers that day. So I always took a note of that. So you can see the day before we had a very big day, and so that's a little insight. So the top picture is actually from the Lake Michigan tour. So the other thing about beauty and life on the road are the people you meet. There's something about being on a bike with touring gear that makes people feel comfortable talking to you. If you roll up at a gas station or restaurant with packs on your bike, people are curious. They want to know what on earth you are doing. They are kind and willing to help. In certain places, particularly Newfoundland and the Upper Peninsula Lake Michigan, drivers pull over regularly to see if you need anything. The small interactions allow you to get a glimpse into people's lives or the values of the community. You can only get on a bike. Cars move too fast to get the feeling of a place. There's also something special about the challenges. Flat tires, headwinds, potholes, long distances between towns, things you feel so much more on a bike. You can see you can read the clips about some of the challenges we had. These moments all become part of the adventure. And for me, at that age, my world started to open up with each new moment. And I'll say, my character and confidence grew. The more normal a small challenge became. So just simple things like fixing a flat tire in record time, or getting used to being in the rain for hours on end and thinking nothing of it. So of course there's the places you stay. So this was my tent, and it was old at the time, but it's still even did the trick. And of course there are things that you would never notice in a car that all of a sudden make a big difference. So for example, having a campsite close to the road. There's nothing worse than after a long day of riding, having to cycle 15 or 20 minutes in from the road into the provincial park campsite. So that infrastructure for cyclists is so important. This is me at the picnic site in PEI, and that quote goes along with it. And of course, there's also, you get to appreciate the small things. So here I wrote just about how nice it was to have a shower, a good hot shower. And again, there's the mom and pop motels that I think are so important to cycle tourism and infrastructure. They're by the roadside, they're warm, they're a great place to stay, they're affordable, and you can walk your bike into them. And these are the things that are overlooked by motorists as they zoom by and are often not on the travel apps, but they are so important for cyclotourism infrastructure.
Is that Sheets Creek?
It's like it would be my claim to fame. And while I mentioned the challenges of the road, rain, cold, headwind, bike trouble, it all factors into how many kilometers you can travel. Sometimes you won't make it to that provincial park you eyed on the map. You have to be creative. So the picture doesn't correspond to the quote, but that quote was from August 9, 2004. We cycled 134 kilometers that day, and I remember we didn't make it into the town, so we just have to walk up to someone's home on a rural property and say, hey, can we pitch our tent on your lawn for the night? So those are the things you do and the things that you learn. And again, there's something about being on a bike that allows people to let their guards down. So, of course, the milestones and reaching your final destination feels great. There is nothing quite like accomplishing your goals. But really, I think that the accomplishments happen on the journey. For me, I learned to calm my mind and live in the present, because you really have nothing to do but think all day on a bike. So it's very important that you learn to calm your mind, or else you will go crazy. And I know mindfulness is really in fashion right now, and it is great, but I all think we should just get on a bike and go for a long bike ride. Challenges you? So for me, it challenged me to slow down, enjoy small things. That has carried me throughout life. The trip gave me confidence, particularly at that age, and it gave me patience. I learned not to be in a rush. I gained perspective. I also learned to detach. At this time, with no smartphones or devices, for nearly 5 weeks, our lives were only about the journey. The rest of the world didn't matter, and it went unnoticed by us. And very small things could bring you joy, like a good shower. And finally, for me, what was really great about this trip was doing it with my father. I learned the beauty of a shared experience and the connection that builds. It's all about cycling and talk of the journey.
Julia, stay here. I forgot to tell you that there's time for Q&A after each of the speakers. So I'm sorry that you weren't thinking of your questions, but you were being mindful and listening. And I just feel so bad for you. 4 flats every day. Oh my God. So does anybody have any questions for Julia? And if you don't right now, you can talk to her afterwards. Yes.
How much preparation did you do beforehand in terms of just getting used to riding, or were you already a confident cyclist?
Quite honestly, not that much. I mean, I think my father was a confident cyclist, and I was maybe a bit overconfident. And so you know, I cycled around in the summer, but I didn't do any intense training. I think it's just go slow, take your time. We have some really short days, some really long days, but just enjoy yourself.
Anyone else?
Do you still do cycle tours?
Yeah, so the last big one was in 2014, but I've done a few just 3 or 4 day tours, the smaller ones.
Thank you so much, Julia, for reminding us to appreciate the small things.